Imagine standing face to face with the very people you've dedicated your life to save, only to have your mission end in a hail of spears. What kind of faith drives a man to walk into that, knowingly? This is the story of Jim Elliot, a man who believed some things were worth dying for and then proved it. His final moments, shared with four companions, would echo through history, asking humanity, is any earthly pursuit worth more than eternal legacy? His story, a testament to radical surrender and audacious love, begins not with the jungle, but in the quiet streets of Portland, Oregon. It was January 8th, 1956, a Sunday. The sun beat down on Palm Beach, a narrow strip of sand hugging the Curare River in Ecuador's vast Amazonian jungle. 5 American missionaries, Jim Elliot, Pete Fleming, Ed McCully, Roger Udarian, and Nate Saint, had landed their Yellow Piper PA-14 family cruiser here, deep in the territory of the Waorani, a fiercely isolated tribe known for their brutal violence. For months, these men had been dropping gifts from the air, axes, buttons, pots. They had even flown over, shouting friendly phrases in the Waorani language, carefully learned from a runaway Waorani woman named Dayuma. This was it. This was the moment of first direct, peaceful contact. The air hummed not just with insects, but with a fragile hope. They had been told, if you make contact, they will kill you. Yet, they were here, unarmed, ready to embrace those who might become their murderers. What deep conviction propelled them to this precipice? Rewind. The year is 1927. James Jim Elliot was born in Portland, Oregon, the third of 4 children to Fred and Clara Elliot, devout Plymouth Brethren believers. From an early age, Jim was exceptional. Bright, athletic, and possessed of an intense personal drive, he excelled in everything he put his hand to. He was a natural leader, a gifted orator, and a formidable debater. But beneath the surface of his outward achievements lay a profound spiritual wrestling. He was not content with a superficial faith. He craved a life utterly consumed by God. His journal, which he meticulously kept from adolescence, became the crucible of his soul. In its pages, he poured out his deepest longings, his intellectual doubts, and his burgeoning conviction that God demanded everything. His early years at Wheaton College, a bastion of evangelical scholarship, only intensified this inner fire. Here, he met kindred spirits, Ed McCully, a star athlete and fellow orator, Pete Fleming, an introspective intellectual, and later, Nate Saint, an adventurous pilot with a deep heart for missions. These friendships were forged not just on shared interests, but on a common burning desire to live lives of eternal significance. Jim wrote in his journal, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." This now iconic declaration wasn't a casual thought. It was the distilled essence of his burgeoning philosophy, the radical surrender of earthly comfort for heavenly reward. He felt an undeniable pull towards foreign missions, specifically to those lands where Christ's name had never been whispered. The more he learned of the world's unreached peoples, the more insatiable his longing became. But where? What tribe? And what would it truly cost? After graduating from Wheaton in 1949, Jim spent a year studying linguistics in Oklahoma, preparing for the daunting task of learning an unwritten tribal language. The call to Ecuador soon became undeniable. He heard tales of the Quichua Indians, and more terrifyingly, of the Waorani, a tribe deep within the Amazon, known locally as Aucas, the savages. Their reputation was fearsome. A small, isolated group, they had killed anyone who encroached upon their territory, missionaries, oil workers, rubber tappers. To attempt contact was considered a death wish, but to Jim, this was precisely why he had to go. "Lord, send me to the Auca. Let my life be given completely for your glory among those who know you not." This wasn't bravado, it was profound obedience. In 1952, Jim Elliot, alongside Pete Fleming, boarded a boat for Ecuador, stepping into a world utterly alien to their American lives. This was the beginning of their journey into the unknown, a journey that would test their physical limits, their intellectual prowess, and the very core of their faith. The jungle shrouded a mystery, and they were determined to unveil it, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Arriving in Ecuador, the two young men immediately faced an overwhelming array of challenges that would break lesser spirits. The oppressive humidity of the jungle, the relentless insects that carried disease, the isolation from everything familiar. But most formidable was the language barrier. They settled among the Quichua Indians, a far more accessible tribe, as a stepping stone. Day after day, Jim wrestled with the complex phonetics and grammar of Quichua, often feeling like a child, struggling to make himself understood. He immersed himself completely, living simply, sharing the gospel through broken phrases. Then gradually with more fluency. He and Pete established a small mission station, sharing the good news with the Quichua, learning their customs, and earning their trust. This was foundational, yet the haunting call of the Waorani, the Ausas, remained a persistent whisper in his soul. They were just miles away, yet worlds apart, completely untouched by the gospel. How could these men, with so little, possibly bridge such an impossible chasm? During this time, another pivotal relationship blossomed. Elizabeth Howard, a fellow Wheaton graduate with her own fierce commitment to missions, arrived in Ecuador. Their courtship was unconventional, punctuated by long, introspective letters filled with theological discussions and heartfelt declarations of their shared purpose. Their love was profound, yet always subservient to their individual and collective call to Christ. They married in 1953, their union a testament to a love deeply rooted in shared conviction, not just emotion. Their daughter Valerie, born in 1955, brought immense joy, but also a deeper, more poignant understanding of the stakes involved in their mission. How could a man with such a profound love for his wife and child still be willing to risk it all for an unseen tribe? The team expanded. Ed McCully, Jim's old college friend, joined them, bringing his athletic energy and unwavering dedication. Roger Udarian, a former paratrooper with a steady, practical nature, added another layer of strength. And then there was Nate Saint, the pilot. Nate was the linchpin, the visionary who understood the strategic importance of sustained aerial contact. He developed ingenious methods for building trust from above, flying over Waorani clearings, lowering gifts in a bucket on a long rope, carefully avoiding direct contact that might trigger their aggression. Each gift drop was a calculated risk, a whispered prayer from the sky. The Waorani, intrigued and wary, began to respond with gifts of their own, placed in clearings for the plane to retrieve. A small, almost imperceptible bridge was being built, but it was still incredibly fragile. One misstep, one misunderstanding could shatter everything. The tension was palpable. Every flight, every drop, every discovery was a step deeper into the unknown. They knew the risks, but the drive to share the gospel was an unquenchable fire. But what would happen when the symbolic gifts from the sky gave way to actual human presence on the ground? The answer would redefine sacrifice. Month after painstaking month, the aerial gift drops continued. Nate Saint, with his expert piloting skills, became the sky god to the Waorani. The missionaries meticulously studied the Waorani language, piecing together phrases from Dayuma, the runaway. They recorded these phrases and broadcast them from Nate's plane, hoping to convey friendly intentions. Then, a breakthrough. A Waorani woman, a young girl, appeared in one of the clearings, taking a gift from the bucket. She was the first direct acknowledged contact. The missionaries saw this as a clear signal from God. It was time for the next step. Operation Auca was born. The plan was audacious in its simplicity, terrifying in its implications. On January 3, 1956, Nate Saint flew the Piper PA-14, carrying Jim Elliot, Pete Fleming, Ed McCully, and Roger Udarian to a sandbar on the Curare River, just miles from a known Waorani village. They named it Palm Beach for the few palm trees scattered there. Their intention was clear: establish a base camp, await an overture from the Waorani, and initiate peaceful contact. They were unarmed, a deliberate decision based on their conviction that the gospel could not be carried with weapons. They believed that meeting violence with violence would be a betrayal of Christ's teachings and would irrevocably damage any chance of reaching the tribe. This decision was met with skepticism and concern from many, yet the 5 men pressed on, resolute in their faith. But what would happen when these two worlds, separated by centuries of fear and misunderstanding, finally collided face to face? On January 6th, 2 Waorani women and 1 man, a young warrior named Nunkui, emerged from the jungle, cautiously approaching the men on Palm Beach. It was a moment of breathtaking breakthrough. The missionaries greeted them warmly, offering gifts. Nunkui even rode in Nate's plane, circling over his village, waving at his people below. It seemed a miracle. Hope surged through the camp. The long, silent period of preparation, the prayers, the risks, all seemed to be culminating in a peaceful, joyous contact. Jim Elliot's heart must have soared. His journal entries spoke of the immense joy and gratitude. The Waorani left, promising to return the next day with more of their people. The men spent the night in prayer, filled with anticipation. This was it. The door to the Waorani heart was opening, or so they thought. The next day, Sunday, January 8th, brought a different kind of encounter. Early in the afternoon, a larger group of Waorani warriors painted for battle approached Palm Beach. The air, which had been thick with hope, now thrummed with a primal tension. The missionaries' calls of friendship were met with an ominous silence. Suddenly, the warriors attacked. Spears tipped with sharpened wood and imbued with ancient fury flew through the air. The 5 men, committed to their vow of nonviolence, made no attempt to defend themselves with their sidearms, which they carried only for emergency signaling. They could have fired, potentially saving their lives, but they chose not to. Jim Elliot, Pete Fleming, Ed McCully, Roger Udarian, and Nate Saint died on that sandbar, their bodies left in the river, their mission seemingly ended in brutal failure. Was this the ultimate paradox? To die for those they had come to save, achieving nothing but their own demise? The world reacted with shock and outrage, many condemning their perceived foolishness. News of their death spread like wildfire, raising questions about the very nature of missionary work and the wisdom of such extreme sacrifice. But the story, far from ending on that blood-soaked beach, had only just begun its most powerful chapter. The wives and families, left behind in the Ecuadorian jungle, faced an unimaginable future. Would they retreat defeated, or would they, against all odds, continue the mission? The world reeled. For days, search parties scoured the river. On January 11th, the bodies of the 5 men were found, confirming the worst fears. The tragedy was front-page news globally, sparking both condemnation and inspiration. Many called them martyrs, heroes of the faith. Others argued they were reckless, even foolish, for placing themselves in such danger. But for the small missionary community in Ecuador, particularly the wives, Elizabeth Elliot, Marilu McCully, Barbara Udarian, and Olive Fleming, the grief was raw, immediate, and deeply personal. They had lost their husbands, the fathers of their young children. Yet, amidst the crushing sorrow, a quiet, unshakable resolve began to form. Less than 2 years later, in 1958, Elizabeth Elliot and Rachel Saint, Nate Saint's sister, a missionary linguist, made a decision that astonished the world. With Valerie Elliot, just a toddler, and others, they ventured back into Waorani territory. How could they? How could they return to the very people who had murdered their loved ones? The answer lay in the very faith that had driven Jim Elliot and his companions. They believed the Waorani were not just murderers, but souls in desperate need of the gospel, Dayuma. The Waorani woman who had lived with Rachel Saint and helped the men learn the language played a crucial role. She acted as their bridge, their interpreter, and their protector. This return was not about revenge. It was about radical forgiveness and uncompromising love. This single act of courage would fundamentally redefine the narrative of Palm Beach. Living among the Waorani, Elizabeth and Rachel faced immense challenges, the same cultural barriers, the same dangers, the same deep-seated distrust. But this time, they came as living testaments to grace. They learned the Waorani language, immersed themselves in the culture, and slowly, painstakingly, began to share the story of Christ's sacrifice. It was an arduous, often terrifying existence. Elizabeth Elliot later recalled moments of fear, of uncertainty, but always tempered by the conviction that this was where God had called her. Her profound book, Through Gates of Splendor, chronicled the events leading up to the martyrdom and her subsequent work among the Waorani, becoming a seminal work of missionary literature that inspired generations. Over time, an astonishing transformation began. The Waorani, once known for their relentless cycle of tribal violence, began to listen. The story of the men who died without retaliation and the women who returned with forgiveness penetrated their hardened hearts. The very warriors who had killed Jim Elliot and his companions, including one named Minkai, came to understand the gospel. They understood sacrifice and blood, but they had never known a love that returned grace for violence. Minkai himself, the warrior who had speared Nate Saint, eventually became a leading elder in the Waorani church, sharing the story of the missionaries and of Christ with his own people. Imagine the profound impact of seeing a murderer transformed into a passionate preacher of peace. This was not just conversion, it was the rewriting of an entire culture. The legacy of Jim Elliot and the other four martyrs is not found in their tragic deaths, but in the vibrant, thriving Waorani Christian community that exists today. Their sacrifice opened a door that might otherwise have remained forever closed. The Waorani, once a people steeped in a constant cycle of revenge killing, are now known for their peaceful coexistence and their deep faith. This is the ultimate testament to the power of the gospel and the profound impact of a life fully surrendered. The blood of the martyrs indeed became the seed of the church. Jim Elliot's famous words, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose," resonated with unparalleled power after Palm Beach. His life and the lives of his companions became a living sermon, an undeniable proof that some things, the eternal, the divine, are worth more than any earthly possession, even life itself. Their story continues to challenge and inspire, asking each generation, what are you willing to give for what you cannot lose? What unseen tribe, what unreached heart is God calling you to? Lessons from a life of ultimate sacrifice. 1. Surrender is not loss, but gain. Jim Elliot's life exemplifies the paradox that true fulfillment comes from laying down one's own will and desires for God's greater purpose. His declaration, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose," isn't just a quote, it's a foundational principle for a life of impact. 2. Courage in the face of the unknown. The decision to enter Waorani territory, knowing the risks, showcases profound courage rooted in faith, not recklessness. It teaches us to step out in obedience, even when the path ahead is fraught with danger. 3. The power of non-retaliation. The missionaries' deliberate choice to remain unarmed and not defend themselves transformed a potential act of aggression into a profound witness. This act of sacrificial love, rather than violence, ultimately opened the door for future reconciliation and conversion. 4. Legacy through forgiveness and love. Elizabeth Elliot and Rachel Saint's return to the Waorani, driven by forgiveness, demonstrated the transformative power of grace. Their continued mission proved that love, not vengeance, is the ultimate agent of change. 5. The long-term impact of short-term sacrifice. While their deaths were immediate and tragic, the long-term impact on the Waorani tribe and global missions has been immense. This reminds us that God often uses our greatest sacrifices for his grandest purposes, sometimes years or decades later. 6. The unreached still exist. Jim Elliot's story vividly highlights the biblical call to reach every nation, tribe, and tongue. It serves as a powerful reminder that there are still communities and peoples today who have never heard the gospel, and the need for dedicated missionaries persists. 7. The cost of discipleship is real. Elliot's life and death illustrate that following Christ often involves hardship, suffering, and even martyrdom. It demands a willingness to pay a high price, believing that the eternal reward far outweighs any earthly cost. 8. God's sovereignty and tragedy. Even in the face of what appeared to be devastating failure, God used the martyrdom of these 5 men to not only transform a violent tribe, but also to ignite a global missions movement, demonstrating his ability to work all things for good. 9. The importance of partnership and teamwork. The story of the 5 men, the pilot, the scholars, the practical workers, demonstrates how diverse gifts and talents, united by a common vision, are essential for impactful ministry. 10. The enduring power of a radical life. Jim Elliot's life remains a beacon for those seeking a deeper, more meaningful existence. He challenged the comfortable, the complacent, and left behind a legacy that continues to ask, what are you willing to give up to gain everything?